I figured if I screwed it up that bad or I couldn't sell it, I could probably drink 90 cases eventually.
If you're patient enough. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Men of Steel podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jmike.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Glad to have you.
Yeah, we're glad to have everyone here. And a big part of why people are here is because the Superman concept is like such in the zeitgeist that it seems to be sort of ubiquitous, right?
Well, mostly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I
you can get away with just having a
so-
guy in a cape as
Yeah.
like in silhouette, like our logo is, and people are like, "Oh yeah, that's obviously Superman, right?" Like the concept sort of like speaks for itself very easily. And as a result, it can be used to highlight a lot of things out there. Superman has been used for advertising by himself, or other superheroes have, or you just use the concept of a superhero. And so we wanted to have a conversation about that. And to have that conversation, we are joined from Iconic Wines by Birk O'Halloran.
Hello.
Birk, I am so glad that we got reconnected. Your company and mine used to work together in our day job life, which is kind of what we're discussing here today. A while back, there was a conversation about like doing something because I'm a superhero nerd, but we bumped into each other more recently when I was at an IDN conference, and we got to talking, particularly because Chris Schmid connected us.
Yeah.
And we got to talking about doing superhero material on my superhero podcast. So can you talk a little bit about Iconic Wines?
Yeah. So Iconic got started basically in 2010 because I got drunk with the right people. I had been working in my wine side. I did hospitality in college, basically decided wine was kind of the most interesting part of hospitality. I wasn't super excited about working in hotels or doing that kind of stuff. By the time I finished my degree, I ended up building out some wine shops for folks, then working in wine imports and distribution like yourself, but in New York City, and then kind of fell into becoming their domestic wine manager for a portfolio that we wholesaled to bars and restaurants. And so I got to know a lot of winemakers out here in California. And in 2010, a guy named Steve Mathiasen, who is now quite famous in the wine space, offered me some fruit. We had become friends, and I was kind of like, that's an amazing opportunity, but I sell wine. I don't know how to make it. That seems like a good way to just light a bunch of money on fire. And another winemaker named Dan Petrowski, who has also gone on to become a pretty important person in our space. I had helped get his brand up and running in New York City, and I think we become friends, and he felt like he owed me a favor, and he said, no, I know you're interested. Like, come give it a try. Like, I was in my late 20s. I had no money, really. So I just maxed out all my credit cards and made like 4 barrels of Chardonnay, which is like 90 cases of wine. I figured if I screwed it up that bad or I couldn't sell it, I could probably drink 90 cases eventually.
If you're patient enough.
It wasn't a business plan. It was people I really respected opening a door and me running through it with not a lot of thought. And then you kind of agree, and then you're left with this thing where you have to create a wine brand, which is fun if it's not a little nerve-wracking. I was reading a couple different art history books and things. I'd always loved comics as a kid, but I'm kind of an ADD person that way. I have a lot of different interests.
You're in good company. If listeners can't see this, but right now we're on video for this call, and like you can see like the set pieces from musicals I worked on, like random projects all behind me, like a comic book spinning rack.
Yeah, nice. No, totally. And so, well, anyways, so we had this. Maybe I should jump a little bit. So you're trying to find a name, right? And so, if you think also like now in the trademark space, like even though they're technically supposed to be separate categories, but they all get crossed over. But beer and spirits and all the wine brands, finding a name you can use, let alone trademark, or just like use and not get sued for a small project to even see if you can get to market is very difficult. I joke that pretty soon we're going to be like pharmaceutical companies where we just have to make up words so that we can have new wine brand
just
names.
Portmanteaus of everything.
Yeah, it's just random consonants and one vowel, and that's the next wine brand. But I stumbled on that no one was using the word heroin. I don't know why, but like an E on the end.
When it's written out, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. At the time, it's funny, now it's become, you have to be careful gendering things these days, but like this was 14, 15 years ago. And we talked a lot about wines being masculine or feminine in style, like masculine wines being more alcohol, kind of richer, heavier, more feminine wines maybe a little bit more aromatic, more acid driven. And with the wine style I was hoping to make was this kind of, I always liked and was attracted to the more aromatic, kind of more delicate, prettier wines. But here in California, like we make big, rich wine. We're just a big, warm climate. We have rich volcanic soils. And so I thought heroin was this cool kind of name, like pretty and powerful, that like summed up the wine I was trying to make. So I already had this nerdy name. In this book I was reading at the time, I found this thing talking about how comic book art, particularly superhero art, was a total kind of American invention. That it was like jazz or rock and roll, and it really came out. While there was some history of comic books in France and stuff like that, that what we think of as a comic book is really an American thing. And to me, like all the light bulbs went off. I was just like, all right, perfect. I had this was one of the names I was thinking about. Growing up, all my heroes wore capes. Now a lot of my heroes are winemakers. And also I'm going up against multi-billion-dollar companies with 90 cases of my whatever Chardonnay. Now it's changed a little bit, but back then it felt like labels were just all white with black cursive writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought, I might as well do something different to stand out, because it's not like I have marketing dollars or any kind of way to put this out there. So I went to Comic-Con in New York City and just started wandering around kind of hat in hand, asking artists if I could trade wine for art to do a label, because I didn't have any money.
Oh, that's so cool. Wait, so about what year is this?
This would have been 2000. It would have been the fall of 2010.
Okay,
like right
so
after.
I was at that Comic-Con, which is just like
kind of funny.
Yeah, I used to be part of a cosplay group, so I forget what costume we were doing that year. That might have been like our first year, so we may have been the Green Lantern Corps.
Nice, yeah, no, it's an awesome event, and it's obviously one of the biggest cons.
You guys might have bumped into each other.
I mean, possibly.
I know. Well, yeah. I mean, it's like 40,000 people there at one time. It's absolutely ridiculous, but there's a chance. I definitely saw Green Lantern. I mean, who knew if it was you? So that was kind of hence why I guess I'm here, is it came out of this kind of interesting combination of mashing loves together and trying to stand out and kind of having that name. So yeah, that first experience ended up meeting some of the artists that we ended up working with even years later, because wine's expensive to make, and so like even to this day I now have almost like a backlog of dream artists. Like I wish I could afford and to make more wines so that we could work with even more artists and do labels. So we've worked all with different artists on all the different labels throughout the thing.
So I guess this is probably a good time to mention for listeners who have no idea what the hell this has to do with anything Superman. So the ultimate aesthetic of your wines is each one has comic book style artwork for all of its labels, and then there's like superhero names going along for each varietal that you're selling, right? So just to connect that dot for anyone who hadn't actually been paying attention.
Yeah. So we have heroin, and then the one that people probably best know me for, just because we make a lot more of this wine. So in wine nerdy high-end wine space, I'm probably best known for heroin. But I basically, when I got to jump and quit my day job, 4 years later, I had this kind of small project. Things were going well. We were selling, but in very cult circles in fancy restaurants or direct mailing lists. And I really wanted to do something that could expand it. So the wines I was selling were like $35-$40 a bottle. To me, that's not really a wine that can be poured by the glass at most restaurants. Most people aren't spending that kind of money on wine on a regular basis. And so I really wanted to make kind of a sub $20 entry price point wine, without it turning into an hour-long story. But the stars kind of aligned in 2014 for me to pull that lever and expand the company. And we went from 400 cases to 4,000 cases. But that line was called Sidekick because we had a superhero wine, and Sidekick was available, and that was our inexpensive wine, so it was perfect. Cliff Chang, who actually did all the art for Wonder Woman for 7 years, drew that label for us, which was amazing. So yes, we have Sidekick, and then our rosé is called Secret Identity. I do a weird orange wine called Shapeshifter, and then I will say it started very superhero-y, and I think all of us, between the superhero movies and everything, it's gotten a little, there's only so much you can play on the Caped Crusader concept before it starts to feel like you're really beating a dead horse. So now we've started to work with more image comic artists, and I've started to give them the illustrators a lot more creative control. So basically it's just things are getting weirder and weirder.
Yeah.
We did a wine called One Shot, and we used a piece of art that Jesse Loningram did that was amazing. That's just a panda with a jetpack because it's awesome.
What are some of the big artists that you've worked with, actually? You've dropped a couple names at this point, but if it started off as you just sort of trading wine for art and it's grown since then, who's, a big one that you're proud of?
Yeah, I mean, they're all cool. We met Tom Feister was probably one of the first guys that really listened to us, and he's based in Atlanta. He was doing all the covers for G.I. Joe for a long time. I actually know that he does a bunch of work for like Rick and Morty
Oh,
now,
okay.
which is kind of cool. And he's done a lot of character development. So he actually kind of helped us develop our heroine character. And I was hoping to get a chance to work with him, but he kind of got more busy. And it's people are very sweet and generous with their time, but at the end of the day, like people, I get it. People need to make money.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with trade, it's sometimes hard to get people's focus and bandwidth. But eventually, like I really wanted the heroine final label to be drawn by a woman. It just felt weird to have like a bunch of white dudes draw a label called heroine and not have
any women involved. Yeah,
like any women involved. So I actually got connected through a friend who used to work with me at a wine shop to Ming Doyle, who's an amazing artist out of Boston. So she ended up doing the final heroine label, but I met Cliff who did those. Who else have we worked with? Tons. I mean, another Brooklyn artist, Ronald Wimbley, who did Prince of Cats.
Okay.
Which I think the project might have stalled out. I haven't heard much about it, but like pre-pandemic, that comic was supposed to be Spike Lee's like next movie, which is crazy.
Oh, cool.
Oh, very cool. I've heard of the title, but I didn't know that it was optioned for a movie.
The comic's definitely worth a read. It's amazing. I mean, if anyone knows Jim Lee, he's kind of my like deathbed artist. I'd love to do a label with. So I'll put that out to the podcast universe for you in an introduction.
I think that you would be that for a lot of people. So.
Yeah, anyone of a certain age that grew up on '90s X-Men,
right?
All back in the rage now.
Yeah, no. Sidebar. Have you been watching X-Men '97?
I have. I'm not caught up. But I think I made it through like the first 3 or 4 episodes.
I am shocked at how good it has been. Like, I feel like this is a tangent, but it's a tangent that is just fun because we're all nerds here and we're all here for superhero stuff. I can't get over how good it's been. Like, I expected to like, kind of enjoy it, but like without like fully remaking it in a new way. Like it has like some of the same like corniness that was inherent of the original cartoon. They have done such a cool rendition of like all this like classic Claremont stuff. It's really fun.
No, I agree. Like I did a shockingly good job of making it feel like the same TV show, but just better.
Yeah.
You compare that to like, did you watch the Skeletor reboot that Kevin's?
No, I've been meaning to, but
it's great. Just if anything, to listen to Mark Hamill be Skeletor, but like that's really the main reason to listen to watch it actually. But it's such a big reboot, and it's fine. It's really enjoyable, but it's obvious like they took the characters and then just rebuilt the whole show. Where like X-Men '97 does, like you said, it's a remarkably. It feels like it's just the same people and the same cast and everything. Like even the voice acting is so close to the original show. It's amazing.
Yeah, like there are characters who don't sound like that to me anymore, but they did for that show, and like they sound consistent in this show, even if it's not necessarily the same voice actors for everyone. Like Xavier doesn't sound like Xavier from the TV show to me anymore. He sounds more like a mix of Patrick Stewart and like a sassy bitch. But like the version that we get when he shows up again in X-Men '97. Spoiler, he's not dead. He's with the Shi'ar. Like, just for the record.
Spoilers, Case.
Like,
oh my god.
I think they say that at the beginning. Like, he's just like, so eventually the character shows up again, and he's got that like dad voice going for him. But you know what? That's what the character on the show had.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And like Magneto is so goddamn good in this. I don't want to spoil anything for the last couple episodes, but man, the last couple episodes have gotten really intense in really good ways, and it's ways that you could see the old school X-Men show doing. I don't know. I just wanted to like. It's weird that I have a superhero podcast, and yet I've not had a chance to like just like gush about X-Men '97 yet. I'm just like so enthralled by how good it's been. And
I'm glad I gave you the opportunity.
So thank you for that one. So let's talk about like the idea behind Iconic Wines. You said that you had the word heroin first as like sort of your jumping off point. At what point was it like, all right, well, and now it makes sense to get like a bunch of like cool like comic book kind of stuff to it? What was that thought process? Just like from like finding the word itself and like figuring out what the label was going to look like.
I've gotten pretty good at doing like online trademark searches in this liquor and spirit space. So I would say like whenever we come up with a new name, for example, like to me, a really obvious word that would fit with our brand is protagonist.
Right.
Like sounds nerdy. It's a cool thing. It's like the hero. That one's taken. Like there's been a wine called protagonist. Like,
really?
Oh yeah. It's really ridiculous. Like we just had to change the name of a project. So we had a wine called Myriad. And when I was looking it up, there was like the first thing I do is just go to Google and type in, whatever word I'm
Hmm.
looking for to find out if there's a wine brand out there. So if it doesn't show up on a Google search, then the next step is to delve into, there are like government record now, like you can go to the government websites and start doing actual trademark searches and see if there's anything active or pending. And so there was a brand called Myriad, but it hadn't made wine for several years. And then I went and checked, and I didn't see any trademarks in my initial searches for the government search. And this is the other weird thing about, let's turn this into a IP law
No, I
podcast.
love
But
to
like,
hear it.
there's this other thing about like first mover stuff. So like, even if you don't trademark anything, but put, you've created a brand, you used the name, and you have proof that you sold it across state lines, that gives you a lot of protections to start. So if someone comes along and tries to trademark your name, but you already have something in use, first use has a lot of play. It's best to eventually trademark and do everything, but you can, if you're a small company and you're trying to do something, or even if you're a small comic creator, anything, like just get the work out there, and that becomes immediately much more defendable. But in this case, it looked like a brand that just wasn't in use anymore, and I thought, well, it's a small project, we'll use it. And then in that time, because wine takes a while, so you kind of come up with a name, you do work on the artist, released it. Flash forward like 2 years later, and I got a kind of grumpy email to our website from the Myriad Winery that had started producing again, and meanwhile went off and trademarked it, and like wanted us to change the name. And so that wine is now called Multifarious. I really wanted to call it the wine formerly known as Myriad, but I just figured we're all small businesses. We don't need to be picking fights that we don't want to spend money on lawyers with. But yeah, so that's kind of the process, is like, I would say, finding a name you can use. It's usually inspired by a characteristic of the wine. In the case of Myriad, it's a grape called Cinsault. And in my research of Cinsault, like wine grapes have a lot of different names, because you'll have like the French name and the Italian name and the American name. And Myriad happens to be a really old grape. So there's a bunch of like Eastern Europe names for it and stuff. So if you go on Wikipedia, the grape actually has like 50 different AKAs. A lot of them translate to really funny things like goat udder and crab butt and like really ridiculous. Jesse Loningram, who is one of the artists we've been working with that I mentioned before, they did the one shot label with us. He does these really amazing kind of fantastical creature art illustrations. In the initial brands, I was much more involved with the artists and trying to direct them. And now, like, to me, it's more fun to let the artist take interpretations to it.
Kind of
So
going
like,
the DC method to the Marvel method of writing. Like trust the
yeah,
artist.
like exactly. And so I just sent him all of the funniest translations, and he came back with this ridiculous label of like a royal prince crab or a goat with a sword riding a crab, and like it looks totally ridiculous, and it's awesome, and it's like one of my favorite labels. So that's kind of at least my process. I don't know if anyone else. I mean, there's not a lot of people doing what
Yeah,
I'm doing.
but
So
I want to go back to like heroin specifically. So like when you had that name, and like what was the aha moment of being like, and superheroes?
I think it was more the idea of comic book art in
Okay.
general. I was born in California. I grew up all over, but wine is very dominated by European history. It has a much older history, right? It's European immigrants that brought wine to this country. And so a lot of wineries out here in California call themselves, French names, Chateau something or another, or Italian Trattoria,
Right.
da da da. And they're always comparing themselves. They're like, oh, these are like the wines of Tuscany. We make Tuscan wines, or we make French wines of this style. It always kind of bothered me when I was on the wine buying side. I was like, well, do you want to be a cover band, or do you want to create an original work? Are you going to work for Marvel and draw X-Men comics, which is cool, and you can do good things that way, but like, or are you going to try to create your own comic or create your own IP? And I would fall more into that camp. That to me is more exciting. And so when I found out that idea of American, like comic book art being American history, that was more like everything clicked for me in terms of like, okay, this is what I want my wines to be original. I want them to be California wine. I don't want them to be French wines. And then that was the idea of like, okay, American pop art on American wine. It differentiates us. We're not $1 million glorious estate. Like I make all of my wines in a decommissioned mushroom grow house that's quite trashy looking, and we keep it clean. It makes good wine, but it's not the beautiful rolling. I forgot you're supposed to be a hedge fund millionaire before you start making wine in California.
Well, it's just interesting, and this is sort of branching into the larger conversation that we wanted to have, which is that like using superheroes to sell a product is ubiquitous. It goes back all the way to the creation of superheroes in the first place. Superman himself was used for propaganda pieces during World War II, but there were superheroes created just to sell things once that became an art form unto itself. Because we talk a lot about the history of like superheroes, how there were precursor kind of concepts which also were related to selling products at various points. I mean, the Shadow started off as the host of a radio hour and would be the one like doing the ad reads for like the stuff on the show. Basically anything popular is going to be used to sell stuff at some point, but like superheroes themselves have really become a part of that. Like researching this, it was like, oh right, Captain Tootsie, for example, which was the Tootsie Roll superhero from the 40s.
Yeah.
Like he would have adventures, and because of Tootsie Rolls, he was in pretty good shape to fight the bad guys in this like Doc Savage slash Superman kind of, but like the leaping Superman, not the flying level Superman kind of concept for the character. But like we were like doing just like a general dive, and there's like so many like actual superheroes from comics that are used for things, and then there's so many things that just use like the idea of superheroes as its own marketing thing, and that's sort of like where like your wines kind of fall into it. It's using like superhero iconography to like catch a person's eye and then care about the product. It's so interesting how that is a thing that is just popular in the world, that it has been going for 90 years now, like since the creation of Superman, like we're almost at like
I feel like it's been more.
I mean, it was 38 and this is 24, so like that's just a terrifying amount of time. And I find it fascinating to see like all the different versions of it, because like we have Burke, you sent us the link to the OnStar commercials from circa the Tim Burton Batman movies, and holy crap, I forgot about those, and I forgot about how good they are. Like the production values,
they're really good.
It's amazing. Like you sent this video, and it's like 10 minutes of like OnStar commercials, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, like, am I gonna watch 10 minutes of OnStar commercials? Like like everyone I know. We're technically Superman, but this is a Batman thing. Go look up Batman.
How dare you?
Look up Batman OnStar on YouTube. It is like there's like a compilation that's like 10 minutes long.
Well, Superman doesn't have a car, so you can't do an OnStar commercial with Superman.
Exactly.
He should have pet insurance.
It's funny in watching some of the examples and stuff you guys sent over before. It made me think of this, like when you're talking about the archetype of the character, right? Like,
yeah.
Even our label heroine, right? Like we had to go through a process with Tom. We had to draw an original superhero who was obviously inspired. You know, I think when you look at our label, you're immediately like, oh, that's like Superwoman or Miss Marvel. There is that defining Superman character of the cape, flying, strong superpowers. And you can draw that without using blue and red, or like put a lightning bolt on her chest. And you can still look at it and be like, I have a pretty good idea as a nerd what that character's superpowers are. Like it's just that archetype. And then in all the examples we were looking at, there's so many more things for Batman, but I was like, it's just because it's so much more commercial. Like he needs stuff.
Right.
like of course it's the OnStar Batmobile. Like, how do you improve the Batmobile? Put OnStar in it. Like, just that is a brilliant concept. Like the one I actually really loved was when the AT&T ad for
Lois and Clark. Yeah. I really like that one.
And it's not even Superman.
Yeah, it just jumps into like Lois and Clark are like dealing with the Daily Planet thing, and they have to like call into France or something like that. And it was just like, oh yeah, we're all just down for the dynamic of Superman being Clark Kent with Lois Lane. Like it required almost no setup for us to like get what was going on in the scene.
Well, and also, like, what does Superman need? Sure, he can fly to France, but that's kind of inconvenient. And then he's going to have a lot of explaining to do when he gets there to report in. Like, but if he has the AT&T International calling card, like, here's a superpower that Superman doesn't actually have. Like, he needs the AT&T card. Like, it's perfect.
That was extremely effective in a way that, like, I was not surprised to find so many like food ads for characters. I mean, I feel like that kind of goes back to like the Popeye roots of superhero fiction, of like eat a thing to like feel better and like maybe have superpowers as a result. Like there was this like Hulk one that we watched for what was it, honey cakes or something like that.
Honeycombs, I think.
Yeah, like it just sheer ridiculous stuff.
Peanut butter. Don't forget the Superman peanut butter.
Oh my god, the peanut butter one was my favorite. That one is like Lex Luthor torturing Superman to find out why his peanut butter is so delicious.
Yeah.
But, like, it's just like, oh my. I also love like Super Friends era Lex Luthor because he's just an idiot. Like he's supposed to be like the ultimate super smart evil genius, and then like in the Super Friends like era, he's just mustache twirling ne'er-do-well of a character. Like, and it's always like he's just the worst iteration of it.
Yeah, I mean, just like amazing the deep lore of superheroes in stuff. There's a Captain America one from like the 60s where it's like a don't waste energy kind of ad. Pardon me. It was from 1980. Sorry, I don't mean to throw off the decade.
The production quality made it feel
Yes.
Yeah.
It felt like Hanna-Barbera, which it might have been. Which kind of threw me just because it was like, oh, is Captain America popular enough at that point to like really have a compelling commercial? But I guess the Underoos commercial was great, like just selling superhero clothing. I was shocked that it was like, oh hell, they're selling Shazam stuff. I totally would have wanted that if I was a kid at that age, but it was a little before my time. There's so much Batman, and it kind of makes sense. The Adam West Batman show made like everything kind of ubiquitous. Like even those OnStar commercials like featured like full scenarios that would have been like right at home with like 60s Batman. Just it had the aesthetic of the Tim Burton Batman. So it makes sense that like Batman's just like so out there that everyone knows like all the status quo things for it. I was shocked to see the new Teen Titans featured in a Say No to Drugs commercial because I was like, is this how like the little like scraps people got of actual like animated versions of their favorite superheroes? Otherwise, it's comics only. But then like, oh yeah, we'll do an animated cartoon for just the
Beer commercial.
for just the Say No to Drugs commercial.
The other one I liked was in terms of illustrating. I was actually speaking of X-Men 97 in a way, but there was it's something that started with a Z, but it was the toy stores in
the
Canada.
Zellers?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like I actually was Googling to see if the same people that did the Tick did those commercials. 'Cause they look like it's like if the guy that drew the Tick
Mhm.
did Batman,
Gee
like the
willikers,
way his like
Batman.
his expression is. Yeah. But even the way like the Batman's face like contorts and it's like really cheesy, but in a great way. I was like, I want to watch an entire Batman cartoon like done by these illustrators. Just the way they drew him is so over the top. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like it's no surprise that like I was primed to be into like superhero stuff when I finally found superhero stuff because like you look at all the ads that I was like inundated with as a kid
Yeah.
and they're all these like superhero things that were just like all over the place. Like outside of actually using superheroes for ads, like do you remember like Apple Cinnamon Cheerios had like their own like Apple and Cinnamon like duo?
Here I go. I am Cinnamon.
Right. Or then just even like more broadly, there's like the whole element of like you look at just about any sort of like kids media and at some point a character will have a fantasy where they like turn into that exact like superhero like archetype, you know, like Stupendous Man from Calvin and Hobbes or Quail Man from like Doug or like Super Grover from like Sesame Street. Like the superhero archetype, it's such easy shorthand and like we're all just like kind of here for it and like it's no surprise that me just like being exposed to every corner of the internet that I was dealing with like set me up to be a superhero fan. Not the internet, the world. Like,
Well,
yeah, I mean, ultimately the internet now, but in the 80s it wasn't the internet. The 80s it was just TV and whatnot, media. That's what I mean.
no one questioned Super Grover. We kind of just went along with it. They were like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, when we were like researching it, and I was like, I'm sure you know TV Trips has a thing for it. They have this page, product as superhero as a basic concept, and of course it's like intensely riddled with examples both real and fictional. Like there's so many in universe kind of ads that we grew up with in like the 80s and 90s referencing then like all these like stuffed cake ads and whatever other like kind of things from like the you know 60s 70s 80s that preceded it, but like even things like Mr. Clean has a certain
I was just
degree.
gonna say that.
Yeah,
Is he a superhero?
Yeah.
I think there's something going on there.
Or what about like Bounty?
Yeah, like
too. There's like it's also just that like yeah they're like what would women want? A really strong jack guy that's good at
and
cleaning.
I think that there is an overlap there. I think that those are similar archetypes in terms of pop culture because I think this goes back to like the strongman mythos that like you can even make like a comparison with like Hercules or like Paul Bunyan or Samson. There's all these characters in lore that are supposed to be these masculine archetypes that we look to as like things to put our faith into. And then to have that then be like reformatted for selling products makes sense. Like we trust this big, strong, bald man for like just how goddamn clean we can get everything.
It's funny. I was going to ask like because you guys are probably more knowledgeable in this just in how much you've talked about Superman, but Are there things that Superman's considered like? Is it Hercules that Superman's kind of considered directly modeled off of, or is he
Oh
kind of a
man.
standalone?
Superman is an amalgamation of ideas, but
Yeah.
Hercules is certainly one of these sort of like precursor kind of concepts that lead into like what we get into. I mean, Superman has this sci-fi kind of element to him. He has a little bit of the Jewish golem kind of concept going into him. He's got a bunch of like Pulp Fiction stuff that directly precedes it. Philip Wiley's The Gladiator is a big one. Tarzan has some elements in there. Doc Savage has some elements in there. A big one is John Carter of Mars has elements in terms of how his powers work. So there, like I said, it's like this hodgepodge of things, but it's all going back to this like this bigger archetype that we see in so many cultures of a strong man that we put our faith in who will save the day and isn't necessarily part of like the establishment. It's not necessarily like the strong king. It's like it's not Gilgamesh, it's Enkidu. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's funny that it has, like you said, when you, if you were going to have any product, no matter what it was, and suddenly they're like, well, we're going to have a superhero mascot or something, right? Like I think no one is thinking of the Shadow. Like the superhero is not going to be wearing a trench coat. Like he's going to be in tight, like skin fitting outfit, and probably have a cape. It's going to be the first couple drawings that your art team's going to come up with. You know, you might be green if you're selling lima beans, but like, okay, it's green Superman. Sell lima beans.
Right. It's wild how the skin tight outfit and the cape have become such iconic elements. I'm reminded of the commentary track for the World's Finest cartoon that they did for the Superman Batman TV show in the 90s, where they were discussing how like the animators had sent back this like footage of Superman and Batman flying next to each other, and they had to like go back to, you know, it was like an Asian studio that was doing the animations, and they were like, why is Batman flying? And they were like, oh, because he has a cape. And that's like such a wild kind of just like cultural thing that like we have exported this idea that like superheroes have capes and can all fly. Even the character that is distinctly like the one who doesn't has that kind of going for him.
Yeah.
Even Aquaman.
Well, Aquaman doesn't have a cape, so he thus cannot fly.
Yeah. You don't want that water drag. By the way, those Aquaman underoos pretty strong. They need to make those an adult size. I would rock a pair.
I mean, all of those, frankly, but for me, it's definitely the Shazam one. But yeah, the Aquaman one is definitely really good. So yeah, it's interesting. There's sort of like two versions of like advertising these characters. Like there's like representing a quality of the product, and then there's just sort of selling the product. And I think that those two versions are like kind of interesting. Like think about like Listerine ads where it's just like, oh, we have like the CG version of Listerine able to like box or be a knight against the deadly gum disease gingivitis, and like it's representing like here's a superheroic aspect of the product that you're consuming. Or I think that like with like your wines, Birk, you are making a case that like each of these wines represents this like characteristic of the product, and that we're like calling it, here's the sidekick, here's the heroine, etc. And then there's the version where it's just like, we are superheroes telling you to like enjoy these great values or this great product, and you should trust us, without like that extra layer of it being like representative. Like I said, like the serial superheroes kind of thing, where the product itself is not being a hero in that situation. It's not like representing a hero. It's just here's the crass commercialism of it. And I find that those two different types of the same basic like lexicon fascinating.
It was interesting to see the kind of cycles too of like, you know, of course it's OnStar and Batman in the 80s. Like, what about like a perfect time, right? Because OnStar ultimately isn't really useful anymore because we all have smartphones now. Like, but it was that right time and right place. And then those Batman movies, as much as like, you know, Batman Begins, and now we all like love those movies. Like those movies were still really big, as cheesy as they seem now. And there's these cycles of like I remember, I have a distinct memory of when Disney got a hold of Star Wars finally, and they come out with a new movie, and seeing Star Wars carrots in the grocery store.
Really?
And they were just carrots, but it had like BB-8 on the bag. And I remember thinking, like, does that work? Is that worth it? Like, who was like, you know, we're gonna sell more carrots? Star Wars carrots. And so I feel like also when things go through cycles of pop culture, you know, we're kind of in a downturn right now of, I think, superhero burnout. There's going to be an era. It might take 20, 30 years, but there's going to be a big resurgence of the Superman movie or the X-Men movie or
I would say
something.
less than that. The cycles that we have seen of superhero stuff has usually been the biggest dip has been like 5 years. Like the Schumacher Batman movies leading into then like the rise of like Blade and the X-Men movies. Like that actual whole window, that whole arc was like a 5 year arc.
I guess that's
It
true.
might
Yeah,
shift in terms of like which versions, but like I think that there's a niche for it. Like even the people who feel burnout like still ultimately love the material, even if it's like not the thing that they need to see right now. They need something else.
Yeah, it's just not what they wanted
Right.
in their thing.
yeah, but that doesn't sell carrots.
That's true. That's
You
that
gotta
does not sell
you
carrots.
gotta have something where everyone is excited about it. But yeah, it's almost to me it's almost like celebrity endorsement at that point, right? Like that's the difference of like, are we going to use this trope because it's cheaper and we don't have to pay licensing fees and we're conveying this archetype, or there's just the flat out like brand recognition on top of something.
Carrots.
I think that's a really good comparison right there because like a lot of these like generic superhero products are like kids products and in many cases are like cereals. Well, compare that with like Wheaties doing like Michael Jordan ads,
That's exactly what I was thinking. Is like the celebrity endorsement. The like, I'm always surprised by like how much money celebrities get paid to be in perfume ads because they don't even like
Mhm.
speak. Half the time it's just them in black and white, and then it's like fragrance, and then that's the end of the ad. And I'm always like, does that? I mean, it must. I assume it works because they
Well,
keep
those and
doing
watch
it.
commercials,
I'm
like
just not.
where
Yeah,
just like look handsome, and then every now and then raise your wrist up. But yeah, I think that there's a strong comparison between like celebrity endorsements and the products that are being supported by like archetypal superheroes, like ones that are created for the product, or even the ones that are the actual like superheroes endorsing the products. I think you see the exact blur between those two concepts right there when it's like, oh yeah, Superman is advertising this thing versus Captain Tootsie is advertising this thing versus Michael Jordan is advertising this thing, you know?
yeah. It's funny. I didn't even think about this till now because it was a really brief conversation years ago. But I met a guy whose job was to maintain the brand character integrity across companies that license it. So, like, if Pez was going to contract with Marvel to do a line of X-Men Pez, his job was to make sure that the Wolverine Pez actually looked like a Wolverine Pez, was like the right like branded colors, had the right shape to the eyes, then tie that
Mhm.
across everything. So like, then talk about a nerdy canon nerd's
Right.
ultimate job is to just like go back to Hasbro and be like, his claws aren't long enough, make them
Your
longer.
job is to wear glasses, push them up occasionally, and then tell them, technically the color scheme
Yeah,
should be actually black, yellow, red, as opposed to
yeah.
yellow, red, black.
Yeah, exactly. No, like the total like nitpicker brand
Well,
integrity.
you say that, but
And I remember thinking that like as the coolest gig.
like,
Like,
well, okay, yeah, it is a cool gig, but like you can see how it used to be necessary. Like you look at old Superman ads from like the 40s and 50s, and like you'll see versions of him in like a red bodysuit with like a blue cape instead, and it's just because like people were sloppy and lazy about their shit.
no, totally. But I think it also speaks to well, they're this kind of cross between a celebrity and a brand,
Yeah.
right? Like they're this character, but this character is endorsing. Like I'm sure that there is a room of people at DC that think like, no matter how much money Preparation H is going to pay us, Superman's never going to do a Preparation H like hemorrhoid
Right.
commercial to the like brand integrity of the character and that kind
Yeah.
of commercializing.
Um, but yeah, I mean, like, so that creates the scenario of you've got again the celebrity who has like all of its agents and managers and all that who are going to be presenting. Here's what we want you to think about this athlete or this actor or whatever. And then we've got the middle ground area where it is like this big branded character who is like an artificial celebrity that is being presented that way, which is your supers man, your bats man, etc. And then you've got the generic superhero, which is like where they're either creating a fully whole like out of cold cloth the character to represent their brand. This is the Captain Tootsies in that scenario, or having just like the sort of like vibe of it in the things that are like those the like marketing ads. It's usually for like business copy where they'll like show superheroes like be a hero at your job kind of one, where it's not like here's a whole superhero, but it's like it's almost like the office worker as a superhero kind of concept or things like that. Have you ever seen that kind of like ad copy?
Yeah, it's funny. We've never had the budget to do this, but I have always wanted to do like a photo ad series for Sidekick Wines of like various social scenarios and like a person walking in with a bunch of bottles of Sidekick and being the hero, like saving, like so, like like a TV ad where like they run out of wine at dinner, and then like Sally bursts through the door and she's got
And
three
maybe she's
bottles of
wearing a domino
Sidekick,
mask.
and she saves. Yeah, I don't know, but she like saves the day, and it's funny too because I honestly like for our wines like because I came out of a fine wine background and the initial wines were all like fine wine, I've always kind of walked this funny razor's edge where like, yes, I always kind of referred to our stuff as American pop art, not superhero art. Like, because I was always worried that I wanted our wines to also stand, we didn't even get into this, but like my wines have a lot of accolades. They're sold in some of the best restaurants in the country. Like I'm very proud of what we put in the bottle. It wasn't just a marketing gimmick for me. It just happened to be like, oh, this is this cool thing that I like the crossover.
And I
it
don't mean
it
at all to like present that. And
No. I think it's fine. I like, but it's because of that, right? Like, 'cause there is so much of it as a gimmick. So I was always really reticent. People like were like, I knew the artist. People would be like, oh, instead of a really formal looking, nice tech document that tells and explains everything, written at a college level, how the wine is made, like you should make a comic book that talks about the wine. And I was always like, really like, like people already, and again, like I said, the labels have changed. When I started 14 years ago, like I was just trying to do something to stand out. But we had restaurants that were like, I can't buy your wine. Like we're a high-end restaurant. I can't put a superhero on this wine's going to cost $100 on our list. Like, and I can't put that on the table. Which now I think things have shifted. I don't hear that argument. Labels have gotten a lot more creative in the wine space. But yeah, I have a very, very distinct memory of going to sell my wines in Michigan and getting an email the night before from the owner of the distribution company we were working with. And they're like, the sales rep's a huge nerd. She's stoked. She's bring these wines out. She wants to know if she should dress as Wonder Woman for the day.
That'd be awesome.
and in the end, I was like, no. And in hindsight, I was like, yeah, I should have just said, yeah. Like, but
I know a few sales reps who would totally get behind that kind of thing.
I mean, you could take something like Mr. Clean or even like or like the Marlboro Man, right? We're talking about like using that strongman type and creating a character that ties into the brand. You can tell when it's done well and when it's more like, we slapped a guy with a cape on it to sell cereal. Right. But I think there is some cool for guys that are looking to play with that inspiration. I do think the line can be walked, but it is a little scary because it's so easy to tip into like cheese.
And instead you want wine and not cheese.
Yeah, but well, I think there's a wine brand called the Zininator. We should have brought that one by comparison. So that's like super cheese, but on the wine side, right? So it's a Zinfandel, obviously, and it's just this big red thing, and the guy's got like a big Z zapper laser cannon thing, and like actually Tom, a lot of the iterations when we were creating the character, the initial stuff he had like her holding grapes or her having like grapes on her chest, and I was like, get rid of all of the wine key.
Yeah, you didn't want it to be a wine superhero. It's like the
wine I didn't want
is
it to
the
be
superhero, it's not a wine superhero kind of thing.
Yeah, so that was what I'd say. Like, and yeah, I mean, there's plenty of that kind of stuff out there. It's funny. There's a wine out of Argentina. It's very different color, different styling of a design of the label, and it's from a different country. But she has like this Mambo Malbec, but it has a superhero girl on it. And probably at least every other month, I have a friend text me being like, "Oh, is this yours?" And I'm like, "It's from Argentina. Like, I don't live there."
Well, on that note, why don't you plug your wines again and talk about where people can find you, follow you, and like find your products?
Yeah, so we're sold in I think 35 states or something like that now. So like our brands are around. You can ask your local wine shops to stock Sidekick. If they have a little trouble finding it, you can always reach out to me directly, and I'll let you know our distributor in that area. You can also buy our wine directly, unless you live in like Utah. Sorry guys, in Utah you have weird laws. IconicWine.com is the easiest one, or Iconic Wine on Instagram. And I joke all the time, we're a massive company of like 2 people. So if you send a message to the website or you reach out through Instagram and you send a direct message, I'm pretty sure if there's even a text button that is my cell phone number through Instagram or whatnot. So yeah, reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you guys if you are looking for the wines or want to find a shop locally, or you can just, like I said, support us directly and buy it right off the website.
Nice. And do you have any social media handles you want to throw out there?
Just Iconic Wine or at Iconic Wine is I'm probably most active on Instagram, and that's still pretty pathetic. I'm pretty bad at that stuff, but we have a presence there. I keep an eye on it.
It's all good. I think everyone needs, from a business standpoint, to be better at social media, and at the same time, for their mental health, should be less good at social media. So I think it's a fine line
Yes.
to walk.
My wife deleted all of it about 3 years ago, and I was very jealous. But yeah, like having a brand, you have to be available.
Speaking of having a brand, Jmike, where can people find you and follow you?
Oh my gosh. I'm still on Twitter, Jmike101. I'm still around for a little bit longer. Still working some stuff out. Hopefully, I might be there. I might move over to Blue Sky eventually. It's gonna happen, Case.
No, I mean, for the record, you have a username because back when it required an invite, you got an invite off of me, and now you don't need it, and you could just hang out with us at Blue Sky.
One day.
Meanwhile, you can hang out with me on Blue Sky or all the other @based platforms at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm holding on to my AIM screen name for dear life. So you can find me there at Quetzalcoatl5 because I was pretentious in high school and I was really into Aztec mythology, and because I was also a nerd for the Legion of Superheroes, and that is why my name is Quetzalcoatl5. But you can find me there. You can find the stuff that we're working on at certainpov.com, as well as you can find this show, Another Pass, which is the other show I host, on our YouTube channel, Certain POV Media. Check that out. It's been blowing up like crazy. So I want to give a shout out there. If you haven't checked us out there, and if that works better for you, or if not, just stay on the podcast feeds. But there's other things at Certain POV Media besides just transcriptions of the show. We also have the Superman Analog series that I host, so that's always cool to check out, and of course our clips from the various episodes. And then, you should check out our Discord server. You can find a link to our Discord server at our website, where you can come hang out with us, interact with us directly. It's a really good time. There's really cool conversations going on all the time. Everything's gotten a lot more active, but it's still like in that manageable, like not like, you can post a message and see the response and not like have to go digging for 45 minutes to find anything from like an hour before. It's a good paced Discord server, so I think that's a good thing to check out. Then you should check out some of the other good shows at Certain POV. I am going to give a shout out to Fun and Games with Matt and Jeff. Matt, our former editor, and Jeff, our current editor, host a lovely conversation about video game culture. They also do the Side Quest series where people come on and talk about games that they enjoy for 5 to 15 minutes and just like gush about like one game that they like really like and want to champion. So check that out, and then come back here for our next episode. But until then, stay super, man.
Men of Steel is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Jmike Folson and Case Aiken. The show is scored and edited by Jeff Moonen. And our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun, whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.